Hello and welcome to this jazz guitar lesson. I'm Chris Whiteman and thanks for joining me. Today we are going to look at some techniques for embellishing melody statements. This is a common practice amongst jazz musicians as a way to interpret and personalize their presentation of the melody statements to jazz standards. The previous lesson I did was on rhythmic syncopation for melody statements, and if you haven't watched that, I'd highly recommend you start there, and I'll put a link in the video description of this video so you can find that video. In that lesson, we left the original melody pitches the same and only focused on changing the rhythmic presentation. And today we're going to be adding melodic embellishment. And so when we add melodic embellishment, we have to change the original rhythms of the melody to compensate for the additional material. And we're going to do this in a way that focuses on syncopation. And so that's why I'm recommending that you watch the previous video just so you have an understanding of the syncopation process. So today I'm going to show you some very simple concepts to embellish melodic content. And we're going to do this in a way that retains the core of the original melody. We want to personalize our presentation as well as retain some integrity of the original melody. So we're going to look at 3 elements you can use for melodic embellishment. There are many more ways to embellish a melody, but these are very simple and they're very effective concepts to work with. We're going to look at examples of how each of these concepts work, and then I'm going to share a study with you utilizing these examples for the standard There'll Never Be Another You. Okay, so the 3 elements we're going to look at today are going to be neighbor tones, and we're going to be focusing on upper and lower neighbor tones. The second concept is going to be chromatic approaches, and the third concept is going to be chromaticism, and we'll talk about the difference between a chromatic approach and chromaticism. So let's look at neighbor tones. Neighbor tones are a melodic embellishment that move either a half step or a whole step away from the original pitch and then return to the original pitch. And if we move higher in pitch above the note, we're going to call that an upper neighbor tone. And if we move below the note, we're going to call that a lower neighbor tone. All right, so let's look at example 1. I'm going to play the pitch C without any embellishment, and then I'm going to play it with an upper neighbor tone, and then again with a lower neighbor tone. I'm going to put my metronome on. I have it set at 86 beats per minute. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. And as I mentioned earlier, you can move in a half step or a whole step in either direction. If you look at the second measure in example 1, we are moving up a whole step. That is actually a diatonic upper neighbor tone because I am playing within the key signature from C to D. And then in the third measure of example 1, I have a non-diatonic lower neighbor tone. You notice the accidental, I went down to B natural. And when to use a diatonic or a non-diatonic, this is an aesthetic choice. So something, you have to kind of flesh out. So let's look at an application of upper and lower neighbor tones. For comparison, I'm going to play the first phrase of There'll Never Be Another You as originally written. 1, 2, 3. So no embellishment there. And now I'm going to play it with a combination of lower and upper neighbor tones. 1, 2, 3. So there we have 2 lower neighbor tones in bar 2. And then in the third measure, we have an upper neighbor tone that falls within a triplet grouping, and I'm using a hammer-on pull-off to execute that. Okay, so now we're going to look at the second element, and that is going to be chromatic approach notes. And these are notes that lead into a target tone from a half step above or below. And these differ from neighbor tones because they don't necessarily bounce back like a neighbor tone. These resolve forward into the target tone. So if we look at the first measure of example 4, we have 2 pitches, no embellishment. We have a G to a B flat. 1, 2, 3, 4. And with the chromatic approach, I am putting the A natural in between those pitches as the approach into the B flat. 1, 2, 3, 4. And those examples one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. And here's an example of us using that chromatic approach in the first phrase of There Will Never Be Another You. 1, 2, 3. All right, and the third element we're going to use today is chromaticism. This is slightly different than a chromatic approach in the sense that it is a series of notes moving in half steps in a single direction. And let's look at some examples. All right, so in the first bar of example 6, we have 3 quarter notes that sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to use chromaticism to take us from the first note to the third note, and we're going to have to compress the rhythm of the first 2 beats. So we're going to move from quarter notes, we're going to move to eighth notes so we can make everything fit. And that sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. And to hear that back to back, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we're going to apply chromaticism to the first phrase of There'll Never Be Another You. And that sounds like this. 1, 2, 3. All right, so now we're going to look at a study I wrote using those 3 elements to embellish the melody to There Will Never Be Another You. All right, thanks so much for joining me. I hope you found this information useful. Everything we went over today is available as a PDF download with standard notation, tablature, as well as a backing track, and that's all available to my Patreon subscribers, and I will put a link in the video description if you're interested in looking into that. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.